You are in for a real treat. This episode was originally recorded for my other podcast, but for you, it's been upgraded and transformed, and now you have the Ask the Pro show. So everything mentioned in this episode will now be found on chrisdufay.com, plus so much more, as I've designed the Ask the Pro podcast and chrisdufay.com to give you exactly what you need to grow your business success and for you to have the money, the freedom, and the happiness you want, making a bigger and better impact to the world unselfishly. So now it's time to delve straight into this episode, and I want you to lap up and enjoy every single second of it. Welcome to the Turning Pro Academy. I'm your host and your coach, Chris Dufay. And before we get kickstarted into this special episode, I want to throw you a big virtual fist bump and an even bigger thank you. I do appreciate and I love you tuning and subscribing into the Turning Pro Academy podcast. It really does put a smile on my dial. Now, this episode was recorded initially for the Fit Body Pro podcast, but this is a must for you. Your brain fitness, your cognition power is crucial to you getting the most out of your business, as your business, your success comes down to you, your creativity, your productivity, your efficiency, and your effectiveness. If you can get better things done and then more of it, then you are fast tracking your success. So it's time to make that happen as I bring on Dr. Hill, which is a cognition neuroscientist doing some brilliant work. As you'll also see, he knows his stuff with how the body works and how to get the most out of it. As we talk a lot about nutrition, we're also going to be delving into how to eat and what to eat that gets the most out of your brain and then your body. How brain training as you think it is actually a dud and what the truths are. How lifestyle factors matter so much, what the mechanisms are that are at play to getting you the most out of your brain, what supplements and what nutrients you should be having and what to be avoiding, and how sleep and meditation are so important, along with some really great action steps for you to be taking. Also a fun point, please excuse my little girl Arlo, she comes barging on into my office as you get to see firsthand the perks of running a lifestyle business, as my office is actually right next to our villa. So you get to see the fun and games and you'll see that. What you also will take away from this episode, I know will have you more confident, in charge, and taking the right actions. So really, get ready to take some notes. Get ready to actually use this. Obviously, I want you to be entertained. I want you to enjoy listening to this, plugging this into your ear holes, but I want you to use this as well. Now, if you're loving this, the best compliment you can give me is an iTunes review. I want to hear from you. Click on over, give me a review that I can eat up. Also, get in contact with me on Facebook and jump on over to turningproacademy.com where you can throw me an email. I want to hear from you. I want to hear what you want me to bring for you, what other topics I can cover, what guests to bring on. So I'm just dishing up what you want to eat up. Now, I also know you love soaking in the audio podcast by being here. So if you're wanting to burn fat, build muscle, transform your body, then tune into and subscribe to the Fit Body Pro podcast over at fitbodypro.com. This is where I can give you the specially advanced, proven strategies, the plans, the guides, the diets, the advice, the program, along with the best of the best that I bring on. It's all killer, it's no filler, and it's making sure you avoid the frustration and the confusion when it really comes to your health, your fitness, and your physique. So to really get the most out of you being here with me right now, get on over to turningproacademy.com. Right now, waiting for you is the treasure trove of free guides that I'm giving away, the online workshops and the insights that are coming straight out of the Six-Figure PT program. So don't be a peanut and miss out. There's all the different that you can get on over, such as how to double your clients, how to start and build your online fitness business, or how to build your reputation, your following, your career, your business, and your success. I'm giving it all away in those exact steps that you can use. So don't miss out on it. Also, there's the show notes and the links from this episode and every other episode waiting on there for you. Now it's really time to bring on Dr. Hill as he is about to unleash some really great insights for you. Dr. Hill, I am absolutely over the moon that you and I are on the call right now. We get to record this for everyone to stuff this into their ear holes. Before we jump into this, because I have got an absolute massive piece of paper right now in front of me with a bunch of questions, and I know we're going to struggle to get through all of these, but I want to say a big thank you for taking the time out for myself and the listener. And I really appreciate this because I know we're going to be able to really kind of delve deep into what you are so good at. So thank you so much, Andrew.
Thanks, Chris. It's my pleasure to be here and spend the time.
All right, my man. So before we even start getting into these questions, you're a neuroscientist.
I am, yeah.
What do you do and why are you so phenomenal?
So I'm what's called a cognitive neuroscientist. There's many different areas of neuroscience, and essentially it means I'm a research psychologist or experimental psychologist trained in examining the intersection of brain and mind. And what that for me means is studying the things that scaffold human experience and performance. And those include big topics and, broad things like sleep and stress and attention and emotions and memory, aging. And of course, that's a pretty exhaustive list, and we quickly are able to frame anything in that context. So I do view the brain as from a brain perspective, thinking about cells and tissues and circuits and all sorts of things. But it ultimately serves trying to inform how we can take control of brain performance, brain health, brain fitness, and understand how the brain works a little bit more.
Fantastic. Okay, so this big lump of a thing sitting on top of my shoulders right now, we want to try and get the absolute most out of that. And I think you brought up something really good, and I wrote this down before we hit record when we were just chatting. It's like, you're a brain fitness professional, and what's the sexy side of being a cognition neuroscientist? Like, where does that delve into that people are really interested in? Like, yes, that I need to do this now. If we had to sell this topic to the listener right now, like, where does that come?
Yeah, well, let me tell you what would happen if somebody came in to work with me personally. I would do a full head recording of baseline brain activity. We call it EEG, electrical patterns of the cortex. And I would essentially, if you went into a brand new gym and got a full sort of body composition assessment, it's a fairly involved process. You're measuring things. You're taking, different sort of resistance measurements or water tank immersions. This is kind of the same thing, but for your brain. So the resting baselines, the sort of measurement is statistically analyzed. It's compared to a database, essentially, of people, usually several thousand people who have non-problematic brains, and how you differ from the average brain out there is what we get back. So you come in, we measure your brain activity, and we put up on the screen these 2 and 3D pictures of brain activity that are your brain, and then we show you all the different ways you're different, significantly different from the average person. And some of those things are things you tend to care about. And so we talk about, oh, look, it looks like you're impulsive and you have sleep onset issues and there's some hypervigilance. Are those things true for you? And the person usually says yes. And then we sort of can get, great, we understand the physiology. So just like we could say, okay, you've got a body fat percentage that is, 25%, and your blood pressure is 150 over 90, all that needs to come down a little bit. We would say, oh, I see you have a lot of frontal theta, which is distractibility or impulsivity. And you're reporting impulsivity in the workplace, 30 minutes into a meeting, you can't sit still. Let's focus on that. Let's design some exercises to train that slow activity down and train fast activity back up in the front part of the brain. And over the next month or so, people see their brain activity change. They come in and work out and exercise their brain doing things like watching movies or playing video games. And it's not quite watching movies and playing video games. What happens is people are hooked up to computers, and as they're doing something like watching a movie, the stimulus that is being given to them, like the movie audio and visuals, are parameterized or made contingent upon fluctuating parameters in your brain. So I mentioned the brainwave theta. It's a distractibility, creative, sort of soft focus, memory access state, but it's not what you want to be in all of the time or have large amounts of it that dominate. And so if you see that and there's reports of distractibility, you can blame the theta probably. And so moment to moment we measure this theta someone's producing. Whenever it goes down or stays down, let's say a movie screen becomes bright and crisp and the audio gets loud. And then a few moments later, their theta goes up in amplitude, which is distraction or impulsivity. And the movie screen goes dark and quiet. And over half an hour of training, there may be hundreds of these events that teach your brain that one state or one of the sets of modes it's in are more desirable, because that's the mode that produces stimulus.
Wow.
And other modes don't. And you sort of shape and you sort of, you move the criteria over time. So the sexy thing is, hey, look, here's your brain. Here's you in a way that we haven't probably ever, shown you before. And let's start working on, your ideal brain, your peak brain that you want to have.
I feel like Christmas has come early because I could geek out on this with you for so long. I feel like this is fantastic. Now, you brought up the concept of training, and there's obviously a very big market out there of brain training. Like everyone thinks like a brain training app or something like that. What's the truth right now with this?
Yeah, the cognitive training apps where you sort of do things on your phone or on the web, the short answer is the vast majority of that stuff is vaporware. There's no proof that it does anything. There's a lot of evidence to the effect that training on a cognitive training, meaning like a sort of, let's say, game platform online that where you practice different memory tests or attention tests. Those things, even if you get better in the task, in the actual game or test you're working on, there's a lot of evidence suggesting that there's no transfer to different environments where you haven't been trained on. And so you're not necessarily getting better at short-term memory or working memory or recall or, spatial orienting. What you're getting better at is the specific test you've been trained on. And unfortunately, there's large companies, with massive users who are buying heavily into the idea of cognitive training. It doesn't really work that well. The only possible benefit, the only maybe in the mix is a set of cognitive tests in a paradigm called the dual N back, D-U-A-L, the letter N and the word back. And this is a working memory test where you pay attention to 1, 2, or 3. Dual is 2, just 2 different stimuli. So like you're watching let's say a tic-tac-toe grid, and you're trying to pay attention to where stimuli pop up in the grid and to an audio stimulus, a spoken letter or word or something. And you have to match stimuli and pay attention some number of trials back in time. And the further back you go in time, let's say you're trying to pay attention to 3 back, it's harder. And then 4 back is very hard, and 5 back. And before you know it, you've lost track of when things happened. That's a working memory loader. And that's the only category of cognitive training that may do something. And I emphasize may because half of the literature out there suggests, again, transfer fails. And the other half suggests that it does not. And there's a slight movement of the needle in working memory. And this is huge. This is very exciting if it can be achieved, because working memory is sort of a bottleneck on every single other aspect of cognitive performance.
Yeah.
It's like if you're working out, if your insulin system is not relatively responsive, healthy, fluctuating, etc., you're never going to be able to pack on muscle and shred, lipids and things off your body the way you want to and develop stable energy, stable power. That's never going to happen if your insulin system's not stable and working well. Same thing's true about working memory and cognition. Working memory failures or issues with working memory or inconsistent working memory can be blamed for a lot of the things we consider other problems or our feature that fails in other problems, a weak resource. So working memory is quite bad in things like ADHD and in things like cognitive aging. In normal cognitive aging, your working memory starts to go. And working memory is highly correlated with intelligence. But 100 years of research have suggested that it's a fixed resource in the human brain. Yours is fixed. It's 5 items plus or minus 2. So, 5 to 9. Actually, I think it's 7 plus or minus 2. So 5 to 9 items.
Yeah.
And so you have a fairly limited number of things you can hold in your mind at any one time. And this can be things you're, going to the store, milk, eggs, butter, bread, sugar, whatever. Not that you have
and
bread or
just
sugar.
Come back with chocolate.
Right, exactly. Chocolate, bacon, some coconut milk, some pecans, and macadamia nuts.
Yeah. And then the wife slaps me.
Yeah. Well, as long as it's high fat and a little bit of chocolate, I think you can, assuage that pain quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
So
okay, so we've got
yeah.
Brain training, usually it's an absolute dud. A little bit of it might in the literature say there is some parlay, but it's if someone's using an app and they're training on this app, you're going to get better at the app. That's great, but it doesn't mean you're actually going to be able to transfer that into real life.
It's just a practice effect in the environment you're working in. It's not so much about the resource you're building. It's about the behavior you're teaching yourself in that moment.
Okay, fantastic. So we've covered the training aspect, and now let me tell you this. This is completely off tangent, a little bit of a head-snapping movement. Now, I'm just looking at my little girl, my daughter. She's 2.5. She's just playing in the garden right now next to the pool. Mm-hmm. What about children's brain development? How can I turn her into a superhuman? Because that's my goal at the end of the day.
Great. Sure. So do a few things. The quick list would include making sure she has lots of very high-quality fats in her diet, including a lot of DHA.
Yeah, good.
Of course, keep her sugars down, keep her insulin stable. The other things you could do for her to sort of enrich her learning trajectories and improve her potential for long-term gains would be multiple languages exposure, at least, if not actual instruction.
That's really funny because she's picked up so much more Bahasa, like so much more Indonesian whilst living here in Bali than both my wife and I have. Like she comes back and she'll say words, I'm like, that's Bahasa. I think my daughter is giving me lip and I don't know about it.
Well, I think it's worth it for her long-term brain health. So, multiple languages are huge, especially ones, though, after you've closed down a little bit some of the most plastic brain periods. So when she's 5, 6, and 7, keep that language development going, and it will have the biggest effect probably. High fat, language, richness is the short answer. Enrichment of her environment, of her learning ability.
Yeah.
Sort of do the thing where anything she finds interesting and fascinating, you can channel every resource down if she'll tolerate it.
That's really interesting that you bring that up because I've noticed she's pulled out like all her puzzles in the last few weeks and is just constantly wanting to do, like, I get her up in the morning and she's like, boom, straight over to like this puzzle, like piecing it together. And I was like, okay, this is awesome. So I went and bought more and I was like, let's get more. Let's keep it going. Until she walks away from it.
Yes. And she's of the age now where she's putting together spatial relations and thinking about like object permanence where, stuff doesn't change size when it's out of shape. Out of sight. So she's doing a lot of really nice, brain development. The more rich the environment is, the more differences in the environment she experiences, the more she will be able to use her brain later.
Okay, fantastic. Excellent. I appreciate that. It's probably for the parents listening, absolutely soak that in, or the parents are soon to be. Fantastic. If not, that was really selfish of myself, but that's okay. So, okay, what about the nutrition side? So we've covered the training side, we've covered the nutrition. We've also, I really wanted to touch on like supplementation, other things that we've brought up before we hit record, such as like meditation, biofeedback, stress management, those sort of things. Let's focus on the nutrition for now. Where are those big gains? You said before, DHA, high fat, obviously keeping the sugars low. Where else does this delve into?
Yeah, DHA as the fat source is most important for children. It's still somewhat important for adults, but as long as you're getting omega-3 dominant fats in your diet, then it matters less which form. Adults can, cross-convert adequately. DHA is a bit more of a brain-focused fat. But it's, I think especially for Westerners, it's more important to, reduce omega-6s in your diet. So, reduce grain-fed meats. In fact, if you're willing to drop grains out of your diet entirely, I would say for most people, especially if you're a Westerner who's been abusing your insulin system or who's been abusing your stress, regulation system, which essentially is the same thing as abusing your insulin system, for a long time, you're not going to be able to regulate carbohydrates in high levels at all. And I think it's important really just to drop that stressor out of the body. So I would say for brain health, high fat, moderate protein, extremely low starch and carbohydrate in free forms. And I tend to recommend people keep, if they're relatively fit, not sort of Iron Men or women types, but, they exercise a few times a week. I think around 100 grams of carbs a day is about the max. And if you're somebody who is, sedentary, you may have to drop significantly below that to keep healthy. And if you're somebody who's pumping out massive amounts of, racks of iron every day, you might have to go up to a couple hundred. If you do find that you need more carbs and you're actually, craving, and just simply adding fat doesn't cut it, no pun intended, then the time to add the carb, the time to sort of push yourself in that way, push your insulin system in that way, would really be right after you work out. The human body has the ability to resorb or incorporate something like 50 grams of carbohydrates an hour max. So if you're planning on doing some carb loading in a way, your muscle glycogen's around 50 grams of carbs. So the body can absorb more, but the muscle glycogen tops out around 50. So if you work out hard, deplete all that stuff, and you're at that point your brain blood sugar's tanking too, and you're getting irritable, and you're bonking. Carbohydrates might not be a bad idea, but an upper limit would be 50 grams. More than that, even in a refeed environment, and you're going to be moving from muscle glycogen replenishment into triglycerides.
Yeah, that's a really funny point that brings up. It's a bit of a side tangent, but it's so true, is because when people start thinking about, I've got to refeed, I've got to it goes kind of down that road of cheat meals, and it's kind of like stuffing their face for one meal, where it works so much more efficiently when actually elongating your carbs out during that time so you can actually replenish better. And I've always seen much better results doing that.
Yeah, I for refeeds, when I just sort of a paleo primal, style diet. And, when I do, cycling to cut a little bit, I just do, I just go up to 100 grams for the refeed. That's not, some drastic amount.
Yeah.
And I often split it over two meals. So, 50 max, just to make sure that it's all getting into my muscles. It's all getting into, place it needs to be, and my triglycerides aren't getting spiked, because I don't need that stress, nor do many people. But it affects the brain too. The brain insulin system, the body insulin system are coupled, sort of loosely. So you can abuse your body insulin system a little bit more aggressively before it affects your brain sometimes. But ultimately, if you are pushing, the insulin signal, and I emphasize the word signal, up in the body and the brain, signaling stops. Cortisol, if you're stressed out, goes up and stays up eventually. Insulin goes up and stays up if you're always overdoing in the way carbohydrate loading, so to speak, and not just loading, but chronic carbohydrates. And once it's pegged, once the signal becomes less sensitive, there's no information from it. And that's the beginning of a massive cascade of long-term damage. I'm sure a lot of your listeners know about, all the things it can do to make it hard to lose muscle and hard to, keep your cardiovascular system healthy, and all of the risks, and, atherosclerosis and diabetes that come along. But there's a brain side of that too. And it does look like inflammation in the brain is, increased with all these factors, all these behavioral factors. And
that's really funny that you bring that up, because from myself, I've just been physique wise, I've just been cruising for a while. I'm still keeping my training high. I'm just staying lean. I'm just not really looking. I'm not going to be competing soon or photo shoots or anything like that. So my focus has really gone to, and hence why we're talking right now, my focus has come really about to how can I get the best out of my brain to help my business, my life, and everything going on through with that. And I've found a massive correlation between stuffing my face and just not being able to get the most out of my head.
And you certainly want in the moment to be clear and to be productive, and that's sort of working counterproductive. But more than in the moment, long term, if you keep pushing the insulin system in the brain beyond its limits, eventually you can develop a sort of brain, diabetes almost, or insulin resistance in the brain, and that does appear to be one of the factors that leads to things like Alzheimer's.
Wow.
So, it's not simply your waistline you're protecting when you keep your fats high and your carbs low.
Okay, beautiful. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in a split with so much more for you. Now, I know you're listening and tuning in because you know how important your health is and how this can also catapult your business. This is why I'm very happy to say that this podcast is sponsored by My Body Blends and my favorite, the Superfood Elixir, the powerful greens drink. Now, this is designed specially to boost energy, aids detoxification, enhances the ability to burn fat, supports healthy carbohydrate metabolism, and best of all, is voted best tasting greens drink. Now, myself and the My Body Blends team are looking for ambassadors to join, so you and your clients get the health benefits plus adding in a strong income stream for for you and your business. The Ambassador Program, which is by application only, means you get exclusive access to sell My Body Blends products like Superfood Elixir to your clients, plus giving you the special ambassador pricing and bonuses. So once you become an ambassador, you can join other top health and fitness players that are adding thousands to their week's income. Now, there is only a limited number of ambassadors we are taking on board, as this is a tribe leading the way together. So to apply and to join, go to mybodyblend.com/ambassador or add the checkout code that is Turning Pro, all one word, when you're going to get your own Superfood Elixir to order. Plus, you're going to get free shipping and a bonus to save yourself over $250 instantly. So just use that coupon code Turning Pro in the checkout and you can save over $250 right now, all on mybodyblends.com. This kind of touches on what the nutrition side, but with ketones, what's your take on ketones, whether taking it exogenously or actually going into ketosis or a super low carb, because that slightly touches upon keeping a high fat diet, low in carbohydrates as well. Do you recommend it at all?
Yeah, it's a little controversial, right? But the idea of going into a ketogenic diet, where you're forcing yourself just to simply, produce them, has a great history in being pro-brain healthy. For a long time, it was one of the recommended things you do when kids have seizures, is you give them a ketogenic diet. And it really does, stabilize the brain in some interesting ways. Certainly, if you've got risks of, diabetes, it also tends to be a good thing to do. But it's a little stressful to the body, and I don't know there's any evidence that ketogenesis is harmful. Certainly, if there's some conditions in the body, ketogenesis is a sign of that condition. It's like a red flag. But the ketogenesis itself, the ketones in the urine, are not necessarily harmful. I think, however, you don't necessarily need to go there to reap all of the benefits of maintaining insulin sensitivity and maintaining sort of energy expenditures in the sweet spot. And so I think staying just above ketosis makes sense dietarily. And in terms of feeding them, it's probably not really all that relevant once you're able to produce them and keep your carbohydrates a little bit low. But that being said, I mean, one of my favorite foods for dieting, so to speak, or cutting a little bit is chicken liver.
Okay.
And there's a huge amount of MCTs and things and other, there's probably some glycogen in there as well, but I have to believe that I'm sort of, consuming chicken ketones, and getting a little boost there. So I think it might be, I haven't done a lot of feeding or sort of supplementing of ketones myself, just because I can quickly drop into that still, even at, 44. But, I think there's nothing wrong with sort of jump starting the process, getting your body used to consuming them. I just think if you still have sugar on board, you're risking a lot of very, very significant problems. The worst thing you could possibly do is try to adopt a high fat or a ketogenic diet while maintaining sugar in your system.
Yes. So especially looking at it, say, as a totem pole of what importance, the sugar's right at the top.
Sugar is much more important than going into a low carb diet. I mean, in terms of refined sugars. And then next is sort of, total carbs, I think, based on your energy expenditure. And that's, Westerners, I think the average, I forget what it was, average middle-aged Westerners consume between 100 and, 300 grams of carbs a day or something, It's high. And I think that was an old study. I think it's ridiculously high in some pockets, and there's a big shift in terms of socioeconomic status. Some groups consume massive amounts of carbohydrates a day, and that's all they consume. Diabetes and brain disease, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, all those things are higher in these groups. So, the brain is part of the body, and it is an organ that requires maintenance and challenge and, care, just like, your heart does, just like your gut does.
Okay. Now, this kind of translates straight over to supplements. Supplementation can obviously be something that's a real snake oils. A lot of the people are touting things that just don't work and completely false. Where are the truths in where this lays?
Yeah, I think the truths are a little bit different, or what's a usable truth is different for different people. There are some supplements that I think are probably universally useful for brain health. Not a very long list, though. Vitamin D3 is about the only one that I would say is absolutely probably something that should be taken by everyone. There's so many ways that D is used in the body and brain to regulate everything from hormones to neurotransmitters, to inflammation. There's lots of D has a lot going on in terms of roles in health. And of course some fatty acids might be necessary if you can't get them in your diet. But beyond that, I think it's a case by case basis. And in terms of brain health, certainly if you're trying to just shore up problems, and you're not going a drug route, you may want to look at certain vitamins. And I think the best bang for the buck, I'm not sure this is fully borne out yet in the research, but I think there's a lot of movement. You can find a lot of useful information and apply it to yourself. If you look at your genetic profile in terms of some enzyme status, there's a suggestion of how B vitamins might be used in your system versus other people's. And you might discover you need, vitamin B12 is called cobalamin, and there's several versions of it. And typically for the past, 40, 50 years, whatever, as a vitamin, it's been cyanocobalamin, produced from bacteria. It's not a very usable form in the body. There's other forms out there that are supplementable in things like methylcobalamin, hydroxycobalamin. And some of those forms are going to be really better for some people and some forms for other people. So if you're trying to work on, energy problems or sort of cognitive, shoring up any possible weak links in energy production, I think the B vitamin class and a little bit of matching the version of B vitamin based on your genetic breakdown enzyme profiles, it's called a methylation analysis, is probably worthwhile as a cheap and easy accessible thing to do that probably will have some benefit. But beyond that, supplements aren't really what I would go after for hitting the bases. It's really your diet. Your diet needs to be where win one needs to be in your diet, or you will never fix or make up for that potential loss, at the very beginning.
You can't out-supplement a bad diet.
You can't. And the vast majority of multivitamins are completely useless and problematic, maybe. I'm not a fan of multis. I think, examine your diet. If you can discover, if you're a vegan or vegetarian, there's some issues with certain nutrients, then you may need to supplement. If you're somebody who's living in an area without access to certain foods, you can't get certain foods, you may need to supplement. But for most people who have, sort of adequate resources and access, you can make good enough choices that you don't need to supplement for that purpose. And then the supplementation becomes more about, some basics like D3 and maybe omega-3 fatty acids. And beyond that, you're sort of verging into nootropics, which aren't supplements. They're not used to fix problems. They're used to try to tweak and tune and take you further.
Okay, you've jumped the gun, Andrew. You've jumped the gun completely. That's good. It's good, but let's go straight in. So with the nootropic side, that was my next question. We're firing straight on into you. So let's jump on into it. Again, I feel like this is a minefield for so many people because look, you could do a Google search on this and you get opinions are like arseholes. Everybody has one, and a lot of them are just going to be wrong as well. So yeah. Where in the nootropics world should we actually go? If I want a superhuman myself, what's the answer?
Well, let me give you a couple of general points first. One, a couple of things to think about when you're crafting your own strategy, instead of just feeding an answer. One thing is that nootropics are not things that alter you in a profound way. If you're expecting to, become Bradley Cooper from Limitless, think again. Anything that alters you profoundly is not sustainable.
Do you have to deal with that a lot?
All the time.
Sorry.
All the time. That's okay. Anything that alters you profoundly is not sustainable. Nootropics, the original definitions, I think we need to hew to, and those would include things like no side effects and neuroprotective, or at least minimal side effects. Neuroprotective, they prevent the brain against damage conditions, including toxins and oxygen deprivation. They help, cognition, including things like memory, attention, sleep, stress, but subtly. These are more designed and oriented for long-term sort of supplementation, if you will. They aren't, supplements is a bad word to use, but long-term regimens to support your performance, the same way you're going to maybe up your fat intake if you're, trying to work harder in output, or you're going to up your, starch intake right after hitting heavy. You may want to modify your choline because you're having problems paying attention and you want to try to boost your acetylcholine, which is involved with memory and attention. Or dopamine. You want to, maybe add some things that affect dopamine. Dopamine's a real tricky one because most things that affect dopamine are stimulants, and no stimulant is a nootropic. Because they have side effects. They're habit forming, withdrawal intolerance. They have cardiovascular risk. They suppress appetite, and they change learning in a way that's not always good. So dopamine, dopaminergics that are direct are often very risky, but something like tyrosine, which is a precursor that's used in building dopamine, you feed the raw material. That's a much more sane strategy. So first point is nootropics are not massive, crazy, wild altering drugs, and they are, sort of relatively innocuous, safe substances with no side effects. If something has a side effect that is risky or unmanageable, it is not a nootropic. It might be a cognitive enhancer or a smart drug, but, even caffeine, not a nootropic. And certainly not some of the, the more sexy, things that are getting bandwidth these days, like modafinil, is absolutely and utterly not a nootropic. It's a smart drug. It's a cognitive enhancer. It's a really mild drug. It doesn't do very much for your cognition. It does a lot for your wakefulness. But it has profoundly life-threatening side effects when they occur.
Yeah.
And so it would not be considered a smart drug. A nootropic, strictly speaking. But lots of things are, including things that are herbs or supplements or other, off-label drugs. So, I think the strategy when you're building your own has to be pick things that have decades of safety and efficacy research. Don't go after anything that is, not in established human trials. And this happens on the internet. I watch people find interesting, research chemicals mentioned in a research paper. They copy the formula, send it to China, have it manufactured, and before you know it, there's a brand new compound on the market that people are stuffing down their gullets. This is not the safe way to do nootropics. Do not chase a high. Do not chase a magic pill. That's a recipe for disaster. A strategy is, where are my strengths? Where are my weaknesses? What do I want to try to tune in my experience? And then what do they look like the classic nootropics that seem to work there? Start there, go slow, be careful, be, very low key. When I was getting involved in this stuff, 10 years or whatever ago, it was very confusing. I mean, I'm a neuroscientist. I was in the middle of grad school. I had taken courses on psychopharm and whatever. And I couldn't figure out for the life of me what was safe and effective or useful or what was a good starting place. And I spent some time, digging around and trying to figure out that and developed a strategy for myself that I ended up. So, when I first got into nootropics, I was in grad school and I found it really confusing. I was taking courses on psychopharm and pharmacodynamics, and I still couldn't figure out what was safe, what was effective, what was a good place to start. And so I ended up developing my own sort of regimen of basic nootropics and, shared them with friends and family. And over time, came up with a decent starting place. But it took me, a neuroscience grad student, some work to really refine what was a good stack or blend of basic nootropics. And a little plug here, as part of that, I helped found a nootropics company called TrueBrain, and we developed a sort of what we consider a best-in-class starting place for active nootropics that is good for beginners or more experienced brain hackers or biohackers.
Yeah.
But there's nothing crazy in it. We decided to do some things when building TrueBrain that even if your listeners don't find TrueBrain, you should pay attention to when choosing products. One, we don't obscure the amounts of any ingredient. That's key. When you're buying brain hacking supplements or smart drugs or nootropics, if the word proprietary blend,
yeah, okay.
Good. You don't know what's in it. You don't know if they're being buzzword compliant. You don't know if the caffeine is in there is, several hundred milligrams. You just don't know what the effect is coming from. So first rule of thumb in choosing, especially blends of nootropics, is only buy things or trust things that tell you how much of what is in it. And the second is, if it's got too many ingredients, they're probably doing what's called fairy dusting in the industry, where they're sprinkling frankly, in little tiny amounts of ingredients that aren't effective doses, simply because that compound has gotten a lot of press recently or is sexy in some way and might increase sales.
Yeah.
But they're not actually, it's not really in the product in any effective amount. So proprietary ingredients and buzzword compliant fairy dusting are things to watch out for when looking at commercial supplements and nootropics out there.
Why do you think True Brain works so well? Like, what are the mechanisms behind what's actually working?
Well, we took a pretty classic approach with the core of it, which is a racetam and a choline. Now, racetams are a class of compounds, they're synthetic, but they were derived from GABA initially. GABA is a neurotransmitter that's very calm and very relaxed. Alcohol releases GABA, so some of your listeners may have experienced that warm, soft, slightly disinhibited feeling before. That's GABA. Some scientists were working on GABA years ago, trying to come up with a new sleep drug. I think the story goes, I don't know how accurate it is, and created a derivative that turned out to make people more focused and seem to improve attention in some ways and change some brain activity to make them more alert. So this was piracetam, which was the sort of granddaddy of all racetams, and still used today. It's an off-label drug in most countries. It's used in some countries for mild ADHD and Alzheimer's and other cognitive stuff. I think it's still used in Russia and Belgium for like post-drowning hypoxia. It's used in some countries for post-alcohol recovery, hangovers, as well as rebuilding post-alcoholic brains. It's an interesting substance. It's very safe, very non-toxic, and it's impossible to overdose on. So we decided to go with piracetam as the main lifter, and we use another version called oxiracetam, which is very similar in the drinks, which has a slightly more, a better flavor, better, longer profile in the drinks. And with the racetam, we added a choline, and we, depending on the product we're talking about, used either something called citicoline or CDP choline, and one called alpha GPC. These are very similar in effect, and effectively they're versions of choline that can get into the brain and have an effect on brain chemistry that seems to be a little more selective than just hitting the body with a cholinergic raw material, which is called cramps and things like choline bitartrate and citrate and all those other body dosing cholines can be useful in small doses, but in the amount you have to take to get it into the brain, I think most of those have blood-brain barrier penetrance that's like 1% or 2%.
Wow.
You'd have to take grams and grams of it, and that would cause heart problems and muscle cramps probably in the body.
I think, sorry to jump in there, Andrew. I think it's a really good point you bring up for the listener to kind of soak in is a lot of the time these kind of different variants of a nutrient are very specific to certain tissues of the body. And obviously this is why we're talking brain, we want to be very specific to be able to, cross that blood-brain barrier to be specific for the brain tissue.
Absolutely. And a couple forms just don't, but alpha GPC and CDP choline, which is also called citicoline, does cross the blood-brain barrier, and they seem to get incorporated into brain tissue a bit more easily. Citicoline seems to be involved with the production or the uptake of choline itself into phosphatidylcholine in the cell membrane. So there's a lot of really interesting mechanisms, and these also are the raw material, we believe, for acetylcholine, which is the primary neurotransmitter involved with memory, essentially. So a cholinergic makes sense, and then the racetams, how they work is still not completely understood. There's some interaction with choline, which is why it makes sense to add a choline source. But the racetams also seem to do some interesting things like improve oxygenation use in the cell, and they seem to change the flexibility of cell membranes, which probably affects receptor activity. And they seem to affect mitochondria energy production as well inside the cell. So historically, the racetams have been used as nootropics as well as smart drugs and other things in most countries. And so that was our first, the heavy lifters are the racetam and a choline. But in figuring out, how these things were being used, I started to notice that a lot of people were getting really inconsistent effects across the same racetam. And it didn't make a lot of sense to me. And I started to look at all of the things I thought might be going on in the brain that might be minimizing or maximizing people's subjective effects of these compounds, these two main, choline and racetam. And with that in mind, I added other things to True Brain, of course, to my own personal stack first, and in grad school, and then helped Chris found True Brain. But it got refined over the years by the other team of neuroscientists we brought in. But largely, it does bear some resemblance. And let me tell you what else is in. There's only a handful of other ingredients. and they're sort of designed to synergize with the first two. So tyrosine, I already mentioned tyrosine as a dopamine precursor. We put tyrosine in TrueBrain. I sort of figured that a lot of people who were looking for attention support or cognition support or memory support might have some problems or some slight issues in memory attention. And those might include people who are ADHD or had other sort of, overwhelmed attention systems. And therefore their dopamine systems might not be fully fueled. It was just a hypothesis, but that was why I added L-tyrosine into TrueBrain. It's also, by itself a great thing to supplement for attention. So it made sense. On the other side of things, I saw the occasional person reporting getting overstimulated by choline or by piracetam. So as I was formulating TrueBrain 1.0, so to speak, we added some things at the top end to buffer overactivity. And those include L-theanine, which is a GABAergic. It helps the brain release GABA. L-theanine is found in tea leaves. It's why you get a smooth, calm push from tea instead of a jitter like you can get from caffeine by itself or with coffee. We added magnesium at the top end. As you know, as a body fitness guy, magnesium is key in muscle firing and nerve firing. It's so huge. In the brain, it tends to allow cells to calm down. If you're stressed out and overwhelmed, magnesium can be a little bit calming. So, if your nutritional status is very low, your brain also has a problem firing cells because of lack of electrolytes. So magnesium sort of helps in the low end and the high end if your nutritional status is, poor.
Yep.
And then some acetyl L-carnitine, which again, as a fitness professional, you probably have heard about. It helps cells burn energy. Mitochondria use it, and these 7 ingredients together sort of help the brain use the first two. The piracetam and the choline are used better, I believe, when there's magnesium, tyrosine, L-car, and those things on board. And we also had some DHA, of course, into the TrueBrain 1.0 or the capsule blend. We didn't include it when we switched to the drink format. When we started creating, we call Think drinks, little 1 ounce active nootropic pouches. Those things have no DHA in them because the fatty acids made them less shelf stable and they changed the flavor. Shall we say, not for the better?
Yeah, I was going to say.
We figured people were already getting their fatty acids, or the drinks were on top of the capsule, so we didn't work that hard to put the algae DHA into the drink format. But so it's just smart formulation is really the short answer. That's why I think.
Absolutely, and I think I think it's what's really needed is people to understand why a formula works so well and what the mechanisms behind the reasoning for the powerful effects that are happening. And you've done a brilliant job of explaining that, obviously, because you bloody well made it so you understand what's going on. So I think that's the important part. Was too many people kind of go, I've heard this is really good, and then they just start taking it. And I'm like, well, do you know what it is? Do you know exactly? There's so many unanswered questions. I think it's quite irresponsible of people to be doing that. Okay, so we've covered some really good things as to how to get the best out of someone's brain. What do you think would be something that you can really leave the listener with that is going to get them to take action, get them to get just, even if it was 1% better from today, what's the best next step?
Yeah, I would say the best next steps are things you can do. And the most accessible ways to hack your brain are to get your sleep regulated and to start a mindfulness or meditation practice, even 5 or 10 minutes a day. And sleep hacking would mean getting, 7-8 hours sleep a night, getting a reasonably, easy onset, not at will, but, easily falling asleep. And here's a great sleep hack. Wake up at the exact same time every day. That's much more important than when you go to bed.
I 100% agree with that. I've been doing that for a while, and I cannot believe how good it is. Like, it is literally like lights on as soon as it's time to get up.
Lights on as soon as it's time to get up, and, the occasional, every so often you pull a late night and you get a few hours too few sleep, doesn't matter nearly as much.
Yes.
So sleep hacking, really important. Get that stuff regulated, and then mindfulness. Develop a mindfulness practice, 10, 20 minutes a morning, 5, 10 minutes, whatever it takes, every morning. It's not the amount, it's the regularity. And I'll leave you with one thought about mindfulness. We didn't talk about it too much, but big misconception. Mindfulness is not, or meditation is not blanking your mind, getting to a blank mind. It is the act of concentration or selective or specific attention. You choose how to attend for a certain amount of time in a certain way on purpose. and you keep the rep of mindfulness or meditation is noticing when you've gotten distracted or you're drifting and bringing your mind back to the anchor. So don't judge or worry about getting your mind to a blank state. The rep of it is sit there and, I'm getting distracted, back to my breath or back to the spot in the wall or the sound, whatever it is you've chosen to make the anchor of your practice that day.
It's funny that you say that, because I've kind of had this conversation with a few people and they're asking about it, because that is something that I do every morning. And
Great.
It's interesting because they think constantly their mind running off somewhere else. That's a good thing, because that's another rep, exactly the terminology that you said. That's another rep that you can get in. So with someone that's got a racy mind, you know what I mean, you could get 50 reps in that mindfulness sitting where someone might only be getting 10 reps. So I'm like, well, you're actually doing a better job than what the other person is doing. And it's like, it's kind of like turning that kind of whole psychology of, that's actually what I'm trying to get out of this. Not, no, you're not going to reach enlightenment and like your whole brain just turns off for 20 minutes. Like, that's not going to happen.
It's like, when we first start going back to the gym after a break and we're sore, maybe it's like, hey, you're at least getting sore. You're feeling it. Isn't that great?
Yes.
Instead of having to hit harder and harder just to get a little bit more, of a personal record or something.
So true. I love that you've brought up the mindfulness and the whole way you've described it. That's brilliant. What's your mindfulness? How do you actually practice it yourself?
So I do 20 minutes a morning, more if I have time. I don't have a lot of time these days. I also don't always sit on the cushion anymore. I've over the past year, I've developed an Ashtanga Mysore practice. Now, Mysore is a form of self-paced yoga, and Ashtanga is a very rigorous, vigorous yoga. So I go to the studio and I'm moving through poses and breathing. The thing about self-paced is nobody's talking to you. And the breathing and the movement are synchronized. So those two things allow me to drop into a deep meditative state very easily. No one talking at you and synchronizing repetitive breath and motion. If I'm not in the Ashtanga studio, then I simply do a 20-minute, sit on the cushion. I do 5 minutes of a single point awareness and 15 minutes of a present time awareness. Now, the classic words for these are samatha and vipassana, focus or insight. Is another way you might think about them. So 5 minutes of focus or single point or samatha, where I watch the sensation, pay attention to the sensation of breath crossing my upper lip in and out. I let the breath do what it wants to do. I sit upright with my back away from a wall, balanced so there's no strain. And I simply, for 5 minutes, I set up a timer so it rings 3 times. As it's ringing, I close my eyes and I listen for the end of the third bell. I then, for 5 minutes, watch the breath in the upper lip, noticing when I've gotten distracted and returning to that simple anchor, simple single point. The emphasis of the practice at this point for me is narrow focus, tight focus, real narrow point. At 5 minutes in, a single bell rings and I switch my attention to the bell. It rises, it falls, and I try to notice the last moment of the bell sounding. When that happens, I switch my attention to a present time awareness practice, otherwise known as vipassana. And that's where I watch the sensation of breath filling my body and exiting my body. And it's more of a rhythmic, cyclical sort of wash that I'm watching instead of a single point. And this is just, simply present time awareness. And I do that for 15 minutes and then 3 bells. And again, watch the sensations until the final moment of the final bell. Only then do I shift my attention to the day and open my eyes and let things sort of come back to an ordinary consciousness, if you will.
Andrew, I feel chilled out just from that. Nice.
It's a pretty good 20-minute practice, and 20 minutes for me is like the sweet spot of I can do it every day. I don't feel rushed. I don't feel pressured. And it doesn't feel like I'm, doing too short of a meditation to not drop into all the states I'm looking for. So
it's very funny when people bring up, it's kind of like, I don't have any time to meditate. And it's always like, well, if you don't have time to meditate, it means you need to meditate more.
And I tell people, hey, if you meditate for 20 minutes or half an hour, you get that time back that same day. You get it back.
Yes, totally.
You don't believe me? Try it for a week, and by the end of the week, the time multiplies that you spend on the cushion in the morning.
That is so true, because you really do see the actual investment payoff. It's straight away. You see, at the end of the day, you're like, I really nailed that.
Efficiency is nice.
Yeah, brilliant. Andrew, I've really enjoyed this chat, and I've got a bunch of notes that I hadn't even been able to get to. So we're going to have to chat soon again, my man. But thank you so much. Before I actually let you go, though, the listener's going to want to know how to get hold of you, what you're doing, and everything that we've chatted about. Where best do we send them?
Sure. So, I'm always accessible via Twitter at Andrew Hill, PhD. The other two easy places to find me are at truebrain.com, TRUbrain.com, and PeakBrainLA.
Beautiful.
PeakBrainLA.com. So those are my three sort of things on the web. And, I encourage folks who have brain questions or cool stories or odd things and quirks. And brains are ridiculously variable. And I'd love to hear about yours if you got something special that you're curious about.
Beautiful. Okay, I'm going to make sure that we link that in the show notes so the listener can get straight over. Andrew, a very big thank you very much for coming on and absolutely unleashing. We've gone way over time, but there was no way I was going to stop that. That was way too good. So big thank you.
Chris. My pleasure. I really appreciate it, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
So now it's time for you to click on over to chrisdufay.com. That's chrisdufey.com to get all the guides and show notes. And if you are wanting the workshops where I walk you through how to build your online business, click on over to chrisdufay.com/start here. This is where I can give you the exact training guides and the workshops for exactly where you're at and the answers that you need. Now, every Friday I'm coming back to you with a new episode. So be sure to subscribe, and if you haven't already, you're going to be getting the world's best insights, the advice and the answers to give you the business, the money, the freedom and the success and happiness that you want. And I want to give you a huge muchas gracias for being here with me. And as always, get in touch with me via the site or via social, as Ask the Pro is about me giving you the answers that you need. So ask away.